We now open the floor for questions for the next 10 minutes. So if you do have a question, please raise your hand and you'll have an usher provide you with a microphone. Yes, you may start, Mr. Chong-Seng.
I would like to ask Emma a question regarding inflorescence. You came out with the statement that on average, one inflorescence a year. I've got a colleague, Mr. Willy André, when he started working at the Fonferdinand, he came, he saw lots of female trees that he felt should have been flowering, but they were not flowering. So basically, he cut all the trees that were shedding them and mulch around the trees. And to his surprise, they started producing flowers. But instead of producing one inflorescence in a year, they produced 3. And he fertilized the nuts. But then the next 2 years, they took a break. They didn't flower. So it sounds like there's a lot of plasticity. I wanted to ask the phenology rangers whether they monitor for production of inflorescence with Coco de Mer.
Dr. Emma, you may start.
Thanks. I think I just used an average value. I think as we've seen even with the growth and everything, there's huge variability in all kinds of the growth, whether it be the leaves or the inflorescences. I'm actually not sure of the range. That I didn't know that there was such variation that you mentioned.
All right, thank you. We have a comment by our CEO.
Yeah, just to clarify, in terms of monitoring the productivity of the trees, we started that, but we had to abandon it. So we are re-looking and integrating that in the phenology program again. So currently, we won't be able to share any data in regards to the productivity of the Coco de Mer. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO. We had another question on this table by Mr. Dogley.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I've got a question for Professor Edward and another one for Dr. Morgan. For the question for Professor Edward is about, your presentation was very interesting, and the only thing that I was asking myself was, if you take the 3 different populations, the one on Curies, the one at Fonferdinand, and the one at Vallée de Mai, probably, as you had alluded to, Vallée de Mai is probably the ideal conditions, environment and factors are really the best that you can have compared to the tree. Now, when you speak about the number of leaves produced per year, and also the width of the leaves where it attaches to the palm, I think the question that comes to mind is, in the case of Vallée de Mai, or compared to Fonferdinand and also Curies, because you have different environmental factors. Fonferdinand is probably a lot drier, and Curies is much more drier, and even the soil there is much more poorer. Would these figures that you got, would they be similar, or would environmental factors play a role so that we might find that there might be differences in the methodology that you've designed might not apply to Fonferdinand, and they might not apply to Curies?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. We have, of course, data for Vallée de Mai and for Curies. And obviously the trees on Curios are much smaller and they're much more stunted. The interesting thing is that the age of the trees and the frequency, the number of leaves produced per year is very similar. So there's something about the rhythm of the plant which I think is fairly constant. And so my guess is that if we're talking about the rhythm, the number of leaves produced per year, I think that probably is going to be fairly constant. What obviously is going to be different is how much the extension growth is per leaf. And as I've indicated, that depends partly upon light conditions. If the plant is in the shade, then it's growing up as fast as it can. But it obviously also depends upon soil conditions. And if the soil is very poor, there's no nutrients and so on, that would also suppress the growth of the trunk. So the answer is certainly yes. And extending our results from Vallée de Mai to Font Ferdinand is a bit of a stretch. You know, you could criticize the age estimates, but of course that's the only data we have at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may, I've got a second question.
Oh. Please go on.
Thank you very much. My second question was for Dr. Morgan. And it's about inbreeding. And normally, if you read most scientific books, they will tell you that even in humans, when you have inbreeding, they bring all sort of genetic problems and deformities. And some people will even call it the living dead because you don't have the diversity for you to survive, adverse conditions like climate change in the future. And but the way you've presented, I might have got you wrong, but my understanding was that the Coco de Mai has designed this strategy for it to reproduce, or that the pollen distribution is relatively constrained, and thereby you get a lot of inbreeding within the population. And I think I understood that that might be to a certain advantage to the population. Personally, I do not really understand because it goes against, what we've been taught in schools and what we've learned during the years. So it would be good if you can elaborate on that and explain exactly what you mean that this could be a positive strategy.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And when we started getting the results from the genetics analysis, we were really interested in this part. We found it captivating how the levels of genetic diversity were not low. They were average compared to other palm species, for example, or other tree species. It was not low. But inbreeding levels were low. They were very low across all populations. So we were thinking about this paradox, like how could it be like that? And we just think that because the Coco de Mai has obviously been evolving, as we've heard, like 70, 65 million years in isolation, we think that any harmful or deleterious alleles, like harmful bits of the genome, have just been purged out over so many millions of years. And the harmful bits, eventually these plants have died, and so we think that happened. And we just think also that because the islands are so nutrient poor, like the Coco de Mai has an amazing system of huge leaves, and it funnels all the rainwater and all the nutrients down to the base of the tree. And on such a nutrient poor soil, we think that this was a huge advantage for the offspring to grow as close as possible to the base of the tree to get these nutrients. And we just think that this kind of is a trade-off, and this is more advantageous, to the Coco de Mai. Peter, would you like to add anything more, because we looked at this together?
Yeah. Well, I think you gave a very good answer. I mean, it really is a paradox. On the one hand, inbreeding tends to increase the chance of producing young. That seems to be clear. And as Emma says, on the other hand, there's very little genetic differentiation right across the range. So there must be both. There must be both enough outbreeding to maintain the genetic diversity, and yet, in general, inbreeding is beneficial. But it is a paradox, and what you learnt at school doesn't apply.
mean, and there are some other species as well where you see that the middle is important. So plants in one population, if you cross them with too close individuals or too far, that's both bad. So there's like a happy medium.
All right, thank you. We only have time for one more question. Apologies, we are running behind schedule. So
Okay.
yeah.
My question is to Dr. Morgan, and I'd like to know what are the main pollinators of Coco de Mer?
Well, this research is being carried out by other SIF staff members, especially Chris Kaiser-Bunbury as well, who's not here today. But it is thought that gecko pollinators are important, so the giant bronze gecko and the Phelsuma, the day geckos. There have been lots of theories over the years, but Peter, probably you know as well more about the research because I haven't seen the final results yet.
No, I haven't seen the final results, but I think it's primarily geckos. That seems to be the case, and I understand that radio tracking experiments, where you sort of put a little radio on a gecko and see how far it goes, and their sort of range of movement matches very well with the pollination distances that Emma showed in her results. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that you can't rule it out. And there are schools of thought about this. I mean, there are schools of thought about this. But I think the school of thought to which we belong favours the gecko, put it that way.
All right, thank you very much for all the questions. Thank you to the speakers. If you have any more burning questions, you may speak to the speakers during our break.